My name is Evelyn Ross, and I'm 48 years old. I live in a quiet lakeside town in Minnesota, about 40 miles west of Minneapolis. My days start slow and simple. I brew a fresh pot of dark roast coffee, let the breeze in through the kitchen window, and listen to the gentle rustling of leaves as the morning settles in. My home isn't fancy, but it's mine, peaceful, uncluttered, and filled with the kind of silence I've grown to appreciate. Every weekday, I walk a few blocks to my office, a modest brick building nestled between a bakery and a used bookshop. I'm the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of a digital health company that creates remote monitoring systems for seniors. We help older adults stay safe and connected, even when they live alone. It's work that matters, not flashy or easy to explain at dinner tables, but meaningful in ways numbers can't capture. But to my family, it's always been a little too technical, complicated, abstract. I've heard things like, so, you work with gadgets? Or you do something with apps, right? I don't blame them for not understanding. What hurt was that they never really tried. In my family, the spotlight has always belonged to my younger brother, Grant. He's a high school football coach in town, lives just 5 minutes from our parents, and hosts every holiday get-together. Grant is outgoing, funny, and charismatic, the kind of guy people naturally want to be around. Growing up, he was the golden boy. And honestly, he still is. My parents beam when they talk about his team's latest win or the new backyard deck he built with his buddies. They introduce him to neighbors with pride. And when it comes to me, it's usually, Evelyn's out there in tech somewhere. She works a lot. That's the line. Every Thanksgiving, I'd fly in from the city, arms full of pie and side dishes I stayed up late to make. And every year, it was like I had walked into a story that didn't need me. People asked about Grant. They shared stories, offered cheers, laughed about his kids. No one ever asked how my work was going, or what it felt like building a company from scratch. They didn't see the late nights I spent writing code or pitching investors. They didn't know I was the one paying for our parents' Medicare Gap plan, their water bill, and the new furnace they couldn't afford last winter. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because they're my family. I just thought maybe, one day, they'd say they were proud. But that day never came. I stayed quiet, dependable, always saying, "Of course, and I've got it," as if those words were stitched into who I was. And slowly, I began to feel like a placeholder in my own story. Just the dependable one. The quiet one. The one who made life easier for everyone else. I never minded being in the background, but I didn't realize how invisible I'd become until the day they left me out of something that should have included me. Not because of logistics, but because I didn't fit their image of family. I had spent my life showing up for people who rarely showed up for me. And no one ever asked if I was tired. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon in mid-October, the kind of fall day where the air feels crisp but comforting, and the golden leaves outside dance along the pavement like tiny echoes of change. I had just wrapped up a product review meeting when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Grant. "Mom and I are working on the birthday tribute for Dad. Wanted to loop you in, but figured you might be slammed with work." At first, I smiled. Finally, something I could be part of. A tribute for Dad's 75th birthday. I'd been planning to surprise him with a custom-engraved wristwatch, the kind that would remind him of time well spent. But this felt like a rare invitation to be seen. I called Grant right away. I was eager, maybe even a little nervous, but I kept my voice steady. "I'd love to be in the video," I said. I was thinking of sharing that story from when he helped me build my first science fair project. Remember the volcano that exploded all over the garage? There was a pause. Too long. Then came the words I didn't expect, and once they were said, I couldn't unhear them. "Actually," Grant began, clearing his throat, "we're focusing more on the people who were around a lot, you know? Folks who've been part of Dad's everyday life. The camera crew's on a tight schedule. And, well, your work stuff's kind of hard to explain anyway." My heart didn't break. It just dropped, like a stone in cold water. Not even a splash. Just silence. I stood in my office, one hand on my desk, the other gripping the phone, trying to make sense of what he'd just said. I wasn't included. Not because I lived too far, or couldn't make it in time, but because my life, my presence, wasn't easy enough to package for a 10-minute video. They didn't think I belonged in my father's story. Not really. I let Grant finish his explanation, all the while nodding silently to myself because I already knew what came next. The story would go on without me. The family would gather around, tell tales, drink cider, and laugh in a living room I used to call home. My absence wouldn't be questioned. It would be convenient. Later that evening, I sat on my couch with the lights off. I didn't cry. I just stared at the glow of the fireplace, letting the flickering shadows speak the truth I hadn't dared to say out loud. I had become a stranger to the people I used to love most. A footnote in their family photo albums. A reliable bank account with no face and no voice. They'd grown used to my generosity. The monthly checks, the emergency payments, the quiet fixes, but not to my feelings. Not to my presence. I was useful, but not welcome. I thought about the time I paid their property tax without being asked. The time I flew in for Thanksgiving and wasn't even in the group photo because I offered to take it. The time I left a company meeting early to rush to Mom's side when her blood pressure spiked, only for her to tell me later that she barely remembered I was there. That night, something shifted in me. Maybe not anger, but something deeper. A sense of finality. I opened my laptop, logged into my bank account, and went to the list of automatic payments. Heating, water, internet, cable, cell phone, over $4,500 a month for nearly 3 years. With every click to cancel, I didn't feel guilty. I felt quiet, still, like I was slowly reclaiming space that had never really been mine. No warning messages popped up. No "are you sure" prompts. Just a simple notification, payment canceled. The silence felt like closure, like the world finally reflecting how invisible I'd been for so long. I didn't call anyone to explain. I didn't send a message to say why. I just stopped. Not to punish them, not out of spite, but because I finally understood. When people only call you when they need something, and never when they just want to hear your voice, that's not love. That's dependence. And when someone tells you, even gently, that your life is too inconvenient to fit their narrative, you owe it to yourself to walk away. Not because you're heartless, but because you've spent far too long giving yours to people who never looked after it. That night, after the phone call with Grant and the quiet exclusion from my father's birthday tribute, I didn't cry. I didn't call a friend. I didn't pace the floors or yell into the dark. I just stood in my living room, wrapped in the dim glow of the fireplace, and listened to the soft hum of my refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. Outside, the wind rustled through the maple trees lining my backyard, and inside me, something settled. Not sadness, not anger, but stillness. A kind of knowing that didn't come with drama or thunder, just the quiet realization that something had changed, and I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a cup of peppermint tea, cradling the warm mug between my hands like it was an anchor. The steam curled up into my face, and I just sat there for a while, breathing, remembering. I thought about the years I'd spent making sure my parents had what they needed. Groceries delivered in winter, their water heater replaced in a rush. Cable and phone bills paid without a second thought. When Mom had that fall 2 years ago, I moved mountains at work to fly in, stayed up all night researching her new medications, and made sure she had a physical therapist scheduled before I flew back out. Nobody asked how I was holding up. Nobody followed up a week later. It was just expected, and I had always delivered. But now, sitting in the silence of my home, I couldn't ignore how one moment, one sentence, had peeled everything back. Your work is kind of hard to explain anyway. As if I were a foreign object in their family circle. As if what I do and who I am no longer fit the mold they'd created for what a daughter should be. That's when I knew I couldn't keep holding up this house of cards by myself. I wasn't part of the family they showed to the world, not really. I was just the invisible backbone, useful when things broke, silent when things got ugly, and forgotten the moment they no longer needed something fixed. I got up from my chair, walked over to my desk, and turned on my laptop. My fingers moved automatically. Log in, bank account, recurring transactions. I didn't hesitate, because the decision had already been made somewhere deep in me. I clicked on the line labeled Mom and Dad Monthly Expenses. It showed a total of $4,620 every month. Utilities, internet, groceries, their Medicare supplement, even a landline phone no one really used except maybe to talk to Grant. I scrolled further. Every charge had gone out like clockwork for 34 straight months. I had paid over $150,000. Quietly, without being asked, without complaint. I hovered the cursor over the first payment and clicked cancel. A message popped up. Are you sure? I clicked yes. The next one, cancel. And the next. Until they were all gone. The screen flashed a simple message. Auto payment successfully canceled.
No alert.
No warning. Just like how I'd existed in that family, unseen, unfelt, unacknowledged. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. I wasn't doing it to punish them. I wasn't being petty or vengeful. I just realized something I should have accepted years ago, when love is only shown when the bills are paid. It's not love. It's a transaction. And I wasn't a daughter to them anymore. Not in the way it counted. I was a service provider. And I was done. I closed the laptop and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. There was no dramatic music playing in the background, no thunderstorm crashing outside. Just a quiet house, a warm tea, and a woman who finally remembered she had limits. And it felt right. Not easy, not painless, but right. That night, I slept soundly, not because everything was fixed, but because I'd stopped trying to fix everything. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Not this time. The next morning, I made coffee, watched the early fog roll over the lake behind my house, and reminded myself that boundaries are not walls. They're doors we learn to close when we're no longer welcome. And that morning, I finally closed mine, with peace in my chest and no need to turn the knob again. About 2 weeks after I canceled the payments, life moved forward with an eerie kind of normalcy. My phone didn't ring. There were no texts, no voicemails. It was as if my absence had slipped in like a draft and no one bothered to close the window. At first, it stung a little, the silence, the lack of acknowledgement. But with each passing day, that ache gave way to a kind of freedom I hadn't known I needed. I poured myself into work. We were expanding our development team, onboarding new hires for the winter cycle, and reviewing internship applications for the spring. One evening, after a long day of back-to-back meetings, I sat at my desk with a steaming mug of cinnamon tea and pulled up a list of applicants sent over by our HR lead. Most names blurred together, solid resumes, decent GPAs, all the usual buzzwords. But one name stopped me cold. Evelyn Ross, my nephew.
Grand-Esson.
I stared at the screen, unsure whether to laugh or sigh. I hadn't spoken to Caleb in over a year, not since the last family gathering, when he'd given me a quick hug and disappeared with the other cool cousins. He was polite, sure, but distant, like the rest of them. Still, I remembered when he was just 10 years old and obsessed with robotics. I was the one who bought him his first Raspberry Pi kit. We'd sat in my garage one weekend, wiring sensors and LEDs, and he told me, "I want to build things that matter like you do, Aunt Evelyn." That was a long time ago, a different world. And now here he was, unknowingly applying for an internship at the very company I co-founded, the one his father once referred to as Evelyn's little tech hobby. I opened his cover letter. He talked about how passionate he was about healthcare innovation, how he wanted to use his coding skills to support aging populations. I sat back in my chair, stunned by the quiet irony. He didn't even realize whose inbox he'd landed in. I could have rejected his application with one click. I could have passed him over quietly, and no one would have known. But something in me paused. Not because I owed them anything, but because he had earned a chance, and I wasn't going to be the kind of adult who took out her wounds on a young man trying to find his place. I flagged his resume for interview. No special treatment, just fairness. The next week, Caleb showed up for his virtual interview, clearly nervous but prepared. He wore a navy button-up, his hair combed neatly, and when the camera blinked on and he saw me sitting on the other side, his eyes went wide. "Aunt Evelyn?" he said, blinking in disbelief. I gave him a calm smile. "Welcome to the team review, Caleb," I said. "Let's talk about your project proposal." He sat straighter, still trying to process what was happening. He nodded slowly, then launched into his presentation. I didn't interrupt. I didn't make it awkward. I let him finish. And when he was done, I looked him in the eye and said, "You did well. You're in consideration." He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for 10 minutes. "Thank you," he said, voice softer. "I didn't know. I didn't realize. I know," I replied, gently. "And that's okay." That evening, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out the window at the soft snowfall beginning to dust the edge of the lake. The whole thing felt like the universe had a sense of humor, or maybe just a sharp sense of timing. My family had dismissed me, written me out of their stories, said my life was too hard to explain. And now, here I was, evaluating my nephew's qualifications, knowing he'd soon be joining the team under my leadership. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like something bigger, a slow, dignified turn of the wheel. And the next day, the news broke in the family group chat. Caleb was thrilled. "Guess who got the internship?" he posted. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Grant must have found out later, because that evening I received my first text from him in nearly 3 months. Just 3 words. "You hired Caleb?" I stared at the screen.
No hello. No epalegi.
Just confusion, maybe even concern. I didn't answer, not because I wanted to punish him, but because for once it wasn't about them. It was about me making choices on my own terms, and letting silence be the answer they had never expected, but perhaps always deserved. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when they showed up, unexpected, unannounced, and standing on my front porch like the past few months hadn't happened. I had just finished folding laundry and was about to sit down with a book and a cup of tea when I heard the doorbell. I almost didn't answer, but something in me, maybe habit, maybe curiosity, pulled me up and toward the door. When I peeked through the glass, I saw them. My mother holding a beige tote bag close to her chest, her eyes tired but searching, and my father standing a few feet behind her with his arms folded across his chest, wearing that same heavy expression I'd seen since I was a teenager, the kind that always came before a conversation. I opened the door slowly. "Hi, honey," my mom said, her voice soft, like she wasn't sure if it was okay to be cheerful. "Can we come in for a bit?" I stepped aside without a word. They walked in, sat on the couch like guests who weren't sure if they were welcome. I poured them glasses of water and took my usual seat in the chair by the fireplace. The air in the room felt strange, not tense exactly, but thick. My mom looked around my home like it was the first time she really saw it. Neat, calm, filled with plants and soft light. A life that was built carefully and carried quietly. "We wanted to talk to you," my dad began, clearing his throat, "about the family and about some things we've been thinking through." I nodded slowly. I didn't interrupt. I wanted to see what they had brought with them, not in their hands, but in their intentions. My mother reached into the tote bag and pulled out a folded paper. "We've been struggling to keep up with some of the bills," she said, eyes glancing down. "Your father's insurance changed, and the house needs some repairs. We thought maybe if you could help again, not as much as before, just something regular. We figured $2,000 a month would help cover everything." I stared at the paper on the table. The numbers neatly typed out, the language so polished it almost looked like a form letter. I let the silence hang in the room for a while, long enough for it to become uncomfortable. Then I looked up and asked, "What about Grant?" My dad shifted. "He's got his hands full. The kids are in college. He's trying." "So was I said. For years. Quietly. Without anyone asking if I was okay. My mother's eyes began to glisten. "I know things were said, things that hurt. We didn't mean to push you away." I looked directly at her. "You didn't just push me away. You erased me from my own father's birthday tribute, because my life didn't fit the version of the family you wanted to show." My father opened his mouth, but I raised a hand gently, not angrily, just firmly. "Please let me finish." They sat back. I took a breath. I paid over $150,000 in the last 3 years. That includes the furnace, the hospital bills, the property tax. I did it because I thought I was helping, because I believed that if I just kept showing up, one day I'd matter as more than a walking wallet. But you made it clear I don't belong unless I'm useful, unless I'm invisible. My mother sniffled. Evelyn, we never wanted you to feel that way. I nodded, but I did. And feelings don't come from nowhere. I stood up, walked over to my desk, and pulled out a simple one-page agreement. If you truly need help, here's what I'm willing to offer. I'll contribute $1, 000 a month, no more. But only if Grant matches it. And if both of you agree, in writing, that when the time comes, the house and remaining assets will transfer to me. My father's face flushed. You're giving your own parents conditions? I met his eyes.
No.
I'm giving you clarity. I won't be guilt anymore. I won't carry the weight for everyone else while being treated like an outsider. If I'm going to help, it has to come with respect. And respect starts with boundaries. My mother looked down. My father stood up abruptly, knocking the glass slightly. We raised you for over 20 years, and now you want a contract. I stayed seated, calm. If you raised me expecting payment, then maybe I was never your daughter, just an investment. And if that's the case, we can run the numbers. But don't ask for unconditional support if you've never offered unconditional love. The room went silent. My mom reached for his arm. Let's go, she whispered. They walked out the door slowly.
No hugs. No promises.
Just the quiet sound of shoes on hardwood and the click of a door closing behind them. When they were gone, I sat in my chair, watching the late afternoon sun stretch across the floor. And in that light, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. Not because they left, but because I had finally stopped leaving myself behind. After that Sunday, they never came back. No phone calls. No messages. Not even a birthday card or a polite holiday check-in. At first, I thought I'd feel a crushing wave of guilt, like I had broken something sacred. But what I actually felt, after the echo of their absence settled, was relief. It was quiet, like most things in my life now, but it was real. For the first time in years, I wasn't constantly checking my phone waiting for a need, request, or another problem I was expected to solve. The silence that once felt like punishment now felt like permission to live, to breathe, to build a life that didn't depend on other people's comfort with who I was. I stopped asking myself if I had been too harsh and started asking better questions. Had they ever made space for my truth? Had they ever cared about the weight I carried? Or the person behind the help I offered? When I stopped showing up out of obligation, no one came looking. That realization, while painful, also felt strangely freeing. I had been clinging to a version of family that only existed in my imagination, one where love was equal, presence was shared, and silence didn't mean rejection. But in reality, I was only remembered when a bill was due or something went wrong. And now that I was no longer covering the cracks, they had to face their own walls. In the weeks that followed, I stopped doing little things I used to do out of guilt. I took down the framed family photo from the hallway and replaced it with a print of Lake Superior at sunrise, soft blue water and golden light stretching across the waves. I unsubscribed from the group email thread that shared vacation plans I was never invited to. I even changed the emergency contact on my medical forms from my mother to a colleague I trusted. It wasn't an act of bitterness. It was an act of release. I no longer wanted to keep space in my life for people who only saw me as useful, not lovable. And the truth is, once I stopped trying to prove my worth to them, I started seeing it more clearly for myself. I found new meaning in the quiet moments. Long walks by the lake, a hot cup of coffee in the morning sun, afternoons spent reading or mentoring one of the younger developers at work who reminded me of a version of myself, eager, unsure, yet full of promise. Caleb, my nephew, continued working with our team. We never talked about the family tension, not once, and I appreciated that. Some things, when fully understood, don't need to be spoken. He treated me with respect, listened when I gave feedback, and slowly grew into a professional I was proud of. In his own quiet way, he became a bridge I never expected. A few months later, as winter melted into spring, I stopped by a small local cafe I'd always passed but never entered. I took a seat by the window, ordered a lavender latte, and glanced up at a wooden sign hanging on the wall. It read, "Home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a choice." I sat there for a long while, watching snowflakes dissolve into the sidewalk, thinking about all the times I had tried to return to a home that never truly welcomed me, and how I kept believing if I just gave more of my money, my time, my silence, I would finally belong. But the truth is, you can't build love on the hope that one day people will see your value. You build love by seeing yourself, choosing yourself, and protecting the peace that comes from not begging to be accepted. That was the greatest lesson I learned, not in a single conversation, but in the quiet aftermath of doing nothing, of not replying, of not rescuing, of letting people feel the weight of their own decisions. And in that silence, I finally heard my own voice again, strong, soft, and no longer apologizing. I've come to believe that family isn't defined by who raised you or who shares your last name. Family is who honors your truth, even when it's inconvenient, who sees your efforts, not just your availability, who shows up not just when it benefits them, but because they care. Today, my life isn't flashy or dramatic. I still wake up early. I still make tea and take long walks and code until my eyes blur. But the difference is, I no longer carry the weight of trying to be someone's version of enough. I am enough, and I finally believe that. And if someone asked me whether I regret how things unfolded with my family, I'd say this. I only regret that it took me so long to stop explaining my worth to people who were never willing to listen. Because peace, real peace, is not found in being accepted. It's found in no longer needing to be. I know my story may not sit comfortably with everyone. In a world where phrases like family first are stitched into throw pillows and church bulletins, choosing distance from your own blood feels radical, even offensive. For years, I believed that walking away meant failure, that stepping back was selfish, that silence was the language of resentment. But what I've come to understand, after months of reflection, after years of exhaustion, is that sometimes silence is the loudest declaration of self-respect you can make. I didn't stop helping my family because I wanted to hurt them. I stopped because I realized I was hurting myself trying to earn love that should have never come with a price tag. You see, I grew up being the dependable one, the one who filled in the gaps, the one who said, "Don't worry, I've got it," even when no one thought to ask how I was doing. And over time, I started to believe that this was my role, the quiet hero in the background. But when my father told me, gently but clearly, that I didn't belong in the family tribute because I was hard to explain, something inside me unraveled. And what followed wasn't revenge. It wasn't coldness. It was clarity. We're told that unconditional love means doing whatever it takes, paying the bills, showing up, letting things slide, keeping the peace. But I've learned that love without respect isn't love at all. It's dependence. It's habit. It's a performance. And the moment I stopped performing, I disappeared from their narrative. That told me everything I needed to know. There's a myth we carry, especially as women, especially as daughters, that our worth is proven through self-sacrifice. That if we're just kind enough, patient enough, generous enough, we'll be invited into the circle of real belonging. But what if the circle was never drawn with us in mind? What if all we've been doing is chasing a version of acceptance that depends on us being silent, small, and endlessly available? I wish someone had told me earlier that you are allowed to choose yourself, even when the people you love don't understand it. You are allowed to stop setting yourself on fire to keep everyone else warm. And that setting boundaries with family doesn't make you cold. It makes you honest. It makes you free. I won't pretend it was easy. There were days I sat by the window, coffee growing cold in my hands, wondering if I'd done the right thing. There were nights I stared at old family photos, trying to reconcile the smiling faces with the silence that now filled the space between us. But every time I felt doubt creep in, I reminded myself of what I'd lived through. Years of emotional neglect disguised as tradition, of being the dependable one while never being truly seen.
That wasn't family.
That was function. And I'm done being someone's utility. These days, I find comfort in smaller things. A quiet morning walk, a recipe passed down from a friend, a handwritten note from a colleague thanking me for mentoring them through a tough season. I've started surrounding myself with people who show up out of choice, not obligation. People who don't need me to shrink so they can shine. People who ask how I'm doing, not what I can do for them. If you're reading this and you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, let me tell you, you are not broken. You are not wrong for wanting something more. And you don't need a grand fight or a dramatic exit to reclaim your worth. Sometimes, all it takes is one quiet decision. One canceled payment. One unanswered call. One moment where you finally say, not out loud, but in your heart, I matter too. And that's where healing begins. Not in the approval you chase, but in the peace you choose. I may not have the kind of family that gathers around the dinner table and shares warm toasts, but I have peace in my home. I have joy in my work. I have people who respect me, not because I pay their bills, but because I bring value by simply being who I am. That is more than enough. And maybe, just maybe, someone else out there needed to hear this. Maybe the story, as personal as it is, helps someone take the first step toward freedom. Because, at the end of the day, we all deserve to be loved without needing to earn it.
We all deserve to rest, to breathe, to be seen.
And most of all, we deserve to come home, even if that home isn't a place or a person, but a quiet space inside ourselves where we finally stop apologizing for being real. Somewhere along the way, we were taught that family is unshakable, that no matter what happens, you stick together. That blood ties and last names are enough to bind people forever. And for a long time, I clung to that idea like it was a life raft. Even when I was exhausted, even when I felt invisible, even when their silence cut deeper than any words ever could. I told myself it was just a rough season, that I had to keep showing up, keep giving, keep proving that I was worth a seat at the table. But as I sit here now, sipping my coffee by the window, watching the golden light filter through the trees, I know better. I know that family, true family, is not defined by genetics or tradition. It's defined by presence, respect, and mutual care. And when those things are missing, when the only thing connecting you is guilt or convenience, you have every right to step away. That realization didn't come to me all at once. It arrived slowly, like the thaw of winter. Quiet, steady, undeniable. It started with silence. The kind of silence that follows you after the calls stop. The kind of silence that used to feel like abandonment, but now feels like breathing. And in that stillness, I began to hear myself again. I began to remember what it felt like to live without constantly being measured by how useful I could be. I let go of the need to be understood by people who had already decided I was too complicated. I let go of the hope that one more favor, one more check, one more sacrifice would finally earn me their affection. Because I realized that real love, healthy love, isn't something you chase. It's something that meets you where you are and stays. It doesn't ask you to explain your worth. It doesn't make you small so others can feel big. It doesn't disappear the moment you say no. These days, when people ask about my family, I offer a soft smile. I don't lie. I don't dramatize. I just say, it's complicated. And then I talk about the people who've shown up, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The neighbor who brings soup when I'm under the weather. The friend who checks in after a tough meeting. The young colleague I mentored, who now calls me her work mom. Those are my people. That is my family. Not because of shared blood, but because of shared hearts. It took me nearly 50 years to understand that sometimes you find your truest connections outside the walls you were born into. And that doesn't mean you're bitter. It means you're free. Free to create new definitions. Free to write your own version of home. Free to live without guilt hanging over your every decision. And if you've ever felt the ache of being the forgotten one, the invisible one, the one who keeps giving without being seen, please hear me when I say this. You are not alone. You are not wrong. You are not selfish. You are someone who deserves a love that fills you back up instead of draining you dry. You are allowed to step away from relationships that only survive when you're suffering. You are allowed to stop picking up the phone when it rings only with requests. And you are allowed, fully and without apology, to choose peace over obligation. One day, you'll wake up and realize that the freedom you feared would be lonely is actually the doorway to something gentler, something more honest. And you'll look around at the quiet life you've built, the laughter that echoes in unexpected places, the meals shared with chosen family, the peace that lingers even when things aren't perfect, and you'll know that you didn't lose a family. You found yourself. You reclaimed your time, your energy, your voice. You stopped proving and started living. That, to me, is what healing looks like. It's not always pretty. It's not always clean, but it's real, and it lasts. So, wherever you are in your journey, whether you're at the very beginning, still afraid to take that first step, or you're already halfway down the road, carrying both sorrow and relief, know this. You are walking toward wholeness. And it's okay if not everyone follows you there. Some stories are better left in the past. Some chapters close not with a bang, but with a quiet, necessary full stop. And some endings, though painful, make space for the most beautiful new beginnings. That's the gift I gave myself. That's the gift you can give yourself, too. A life that doesn't revolve around being needed, but instead being known. Truly, fully, gently known. And loved for exactly who you are.